There are some moments when the truth behind why someone is standing on a stage goes so much deeper than anyone expected, when what seems like a fun family game show becomes something else entirely. What happened when 38-year-old Emily Chen, an ICU nurse from Seattle, walked onto the Family Feud stage with her sister's family on a Tuesday afternoon in July 2024, smiling and waving to the audience like any other contestant, was the revelation of a promise made to a dying patient, a bucket list that had one item left, and a truth so heartbreaking that when she finally explained her real reason for being there, the entire production would grind to a halt. Steve Harvey would put down his cards, the crew would stop working, and for several minutes the only sound in the studio would be crying as everyone present realized they weren't witnessing entertainment. They were witnessing someone trying to honor a promise to the dead while racing against her own terminal diagnosis. Emily stood there looking healthy and normal, nobody knowing that the headscarf she wore wasn't a fashion choice, but covered the fact that chemotherapy had taken her hair, that the long sleeves hid the port in her chest where poison was pumped weekly in a desperate attempt to slow the stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had a 3% 5-year survival rate. If you've ever made a promise to someone dying that you knew might be impossible to keep, if you've ever tried to live fully when you're running out of time, if you've ever hidden a terminal diagnosis because you didn't want people treating you like you were already dead, you need to hear why this nurse was really on Family Feud. Before we begin, if you believe that some promises matter more than our own fear or pain, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because we share stories about people who kept their word, even when it cost them everything. Emily Chen was born in 1986 in Seattle to Taiwanese immigrant parents who ran a small grocery store in the International District. She grew up working in the store, helping translate for customers, learning young that hard work and family obligation were inseparable. Her parents had sacrificed everything to come to America, to build a life, and Emily understood from childhood that her job was to make that sacrifice worth it by becoming successful, by honoring them through achievement. She excelled in school, got into the University of Washington, and decided to become a nurse because she wanted to help people, wanted work that mattered, wanted a career that was about service rather than just income. She graduated with her nursing degree in 2008 and got a job at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, eventually specializing in ICU nursing, taking care of the sickest patients, the ones who were often dying, the ones who needed someone to see them as human beings and not just medical cases. Emily was good at her job, known for being technically skilled but also emotionally present, the kind of nurse who would sit and hold a dying patient's hand when no family was present, who would advocate fiercely for her patients, who would remember birthdays and bring in small treats and somehow make the ICU feel less like a place where people went to die. In 2012, Emily married a software engineer named David. They tried to have children, struggled with infertility, went through 2 failed IVF rounds that left them emotionally and financially exhausted, and eventually decided to accept being childless and build a full life anyway. Emily poured her maternal instincts into her patients, treating them like family, especially the ones who had no visitors, who died alone. Her colleagues sometimes said Emily got too attached, that she needed better boundaries, but Emily couldn't help it. She saw her patients as whole people with histories and dreams and families, not just case numbers. In March 2023, Emily started having symptoms that she initially dismissed: indigestion, some back pain, feeling more tired than usual. She was 37 years old and assumed it was stress, too many shifts, not taking care of herself. But by May 2023, the symptoms were worse and she finally went to her doctor, who ordered tests. The CT scan showed a mass on her pancreas, and the biopsy confirmed what Emily already suspected from working in healthcare: pancreatic cancer, stage 4, already metastasized to her liver. The oncologist gave her the statistics she already knew from caring for cancer patients: median survival of 6-12 months, 5-year survival rate under 3%. Treatment would be palliative, not curative, focused on extending life and managing symptoms rather than curing the disease. Emily was 37 years old, had never smoked, had no family history of pancreatic cancer, had done everything right, and she was going to die probably within a year. She told David, told her parents, told her sister Michelle, and they all cried and raged at the unfairness of it. Emily started chemotherapy in June 2023, the brutal kind that made her violently sick but might buy her a few more months. She kept working as long as she could, through July and August, until the chemo made her too weak and the hospital gently insisted she go on medical leave. She fought them, wanted to keep working, couldn't imagine not being a nurse, but by September 2023 she had to accept that her body couldn't handle 12-hour shifts anymore. She went on disability, spent her days managing her treatment, her symptoms, her slowly failing body. The hair loss started in October, total and complete, and Emily wore scarves and eventually wigs, not wanting to look like a cancer patient, not wanting the pity in people's eyes when they saw a bald woman and immediately knew what that meant. In November 2023, Emily was admitted to the very ICU where she'd worked for complications from her chemo, dehydration, and an infection that nearly killed her. She spent 5 days as a patient instead of a nurse, being cared for by her former colleagues who were devastated to see her on the other side of the bed rails. In the bed next to her, separated by a curtain, was a woman named Margaret Sullivan, 73 years old, dying of congestive heart failure, DNR's DNI orders in place, just waiting for the end. Margaret had no visitors the entire 5 days Emily was there, no family, no friends, just a lonely old woman dying alone. Emily, even though she was sick herself, started talking to Margaret through the curtain, asking about her life, learning that Margaret had been a teacher for 40 years, had never married, had outlived all her close friends, and was facing death with resignation and sadness. "I didn't live enough," Margaret told Emily one night when they both couldn't sleep. "I was always so careful, so worried about money and safety and being responsible. I never took risks, never did the things I dreamed about, and now I'm dying and I have so many regrets about the life I didn't live." Emily, facing her own mortality, understood that feeling intimately. She asked Margaret what she'd always wanted to do, what dreams had gone unfulfilled. Margaret's list was heartbreaking in its modesty. She'd always wanted to travel to Paris, wanted to learn to paint, wanted to be on a game show because she loved game shows and thought it would be fun. Especially Family Feud. Margaret said, "I've watched that show for 30 years. I always thought it would be so fun to be on there with a family, to play the game, to meet Steve Harvey. But I never applied, always told myself maybe next year, maybe when I had more time, and now I'm out of time." Emily held Margaret's hand through the gap in the curtain, and they talked about regrets, about the lives they'd wanted versus the lives they'd lived. Margaret died 2 days after Emily was discharged, alone in the middle of the night, and Emily wasn't there, but she got the call from one of her former colleagues. Emily went to Margaret's funeral, one of only 5 people who attended, and she cried for this woman she'd barely known, but who had showed Emily something important. Don't die with regrets. Don't put off the things you want to do. Don't wait for someday, because someday might never come. After Margaret's funeral, Emily made a decision. She had maybe 6-9 months left if the chemo kept working, maybe less if it stopped, and she was going to use that time to live, really live, not just manage her dying. She made a bucket list. Modest like Margaret's had been. She wanted to see the ocean one more time, wanted to eat at her favorite restaurant without worrying about calories, wanted to tell people she loved them without holding back, wanted to do one adventurous thing that scared her, and she wanted to go on Family Feud. For Margaret, who never got to. For herself, because she'd always loved the show too, had watched it with her parents growing up, had watched it with David. It represented joy and family and laughter, all the things Emily wanted to experience fully before she died. In December 2023, Emily filled out the Family Feud application. She didn't mention she was dying, the application didn't ask, and she didn't volunteer. She just said she loved the show, watched it with her family, thought it would be fun. Her sister Michelle agreed to be on the team, along with Michelle's husband and 2 teenage kids. Family. For Family Feud purposes, the application asked why they wanted to be on the show, and Emily wrote, "Because life is short and we should grab joy wherever we can find it." They didn't hear back for months, and Emily started to worry she'd run out of time. The chemo was working less effectively by February 2024, the cancer progressing despite treatment. Her oncologist started talking about end-of-life planning, about hospice, about how much time she might have left. Maybe 3 months, maybe 6 if they were lucky. Emily pushed back, said she wasn't ready for hospice, wasn't ready to stop fighting. She had things she still needed to do. In March 2024, Emily got the call her family had been selected for Family Feud. They'd tape in July. Emily didn't know if she'd be alive in July, didn't know if she'd be strong enough to travel even if she was still alive. But she said yes immediately, told them her family would be there, didn't mention that she might not be. Between March and July, Emily's health deteriorated. The chemo wasn't working anymore, the cancer was growing, spreading, taking over. Her oncologist recommended stopping treatment, said they were just making her sicker without extending her life anymore. Emily agreed to stop in June, and without the chemo, she actually felt better for a while, more energy, less nausea, like her body was grateful to not be poisoned anymore. She knew this reprieve was temporary, that without treatment the cancer would kill her faster, but she'd made a calculation. She'd rather feel okay for her last weeks than feel terrible for a few extra weeks. She wanted to be strong enough to get to Los Angeles, to be on that show, to keep her promise to Margaret and to herself. The taping was scheduled for July 16, 2024. Emily's oncologist said she probably had 4-8 weeks left, that she was declining rapidly now that treatment had stopped. Going to Los Angeles, being on a game show, the travel and stress and physical exertion would probably accelerate her death. But Emily didn't care. She was dying anyway, and she was going to die having done this one thing she wanted to do. She flew to LA with Michelle's family on July 15th, and the trip was hard, the plane uncomfortable, her body weak, but she made it. On the day of the taping, Emily wore a purple headscarf to cover her baldness, wore long sleeves to hide her port and the bruises from medical procedures, put on makeup to hide how thin and pale she was. She looked sick if you knew what to look for, but to casual observation she just looked maybe tired, maybe a little thin, nothing that screamed terminal cancer patient. They arrived at the studio, went through hair and makeup, were briefed on the game. The producers were kind and enthusiastic, had no idea one of their contestants was dying. Emily was running on adrenaline and determination, ignoring the pain in her abdomen, ignoring the weakness in her legs, focusing only on being present for this moment. When they walked onto the stage, when the lights and cameras and audience all became real, Emily felt a surge of joy so pure it almost hurt. She'd made it. She'd kept her promise to Margaret. She was actually here. Steve Harvey came out with his usual energy, starting his introductions, working his way down the line. He got to Emily and smiled warmly. "And what's your name?" "Beautiful." Emily smiled back. "I'm Emily Chen. I'm a nurse from Seattle." Steve nodded appreciatively. "A nurse. Thank you for the work you do. Nurses don't get enough credit. How long have you been nursing?" Emily's voice was steady. 16 years, ICU nurse. I take care of really sick people." Steve made a joke about how tough ICU nurses have to be, and Emily laughed, and everything felt normal and fun, and then Steve asked the question that would change everything. "So Emily, what made you want to come on Family Feud? What brings you here today?" It was a standard question, the kind Steve asked every contestant, expecting answers about loving the show or wanting to have fun with family. But Emily looked at him, and something in her face shifted, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that immediately changed the energy in the room. "Steve, can I be completely honest with you about why I'm here?" Steve, sensing this wasn't going to be a light answer, nodded. "Of course, take your time." Emily took a breath, and the words came out steady despite the emotions underneath. "Last November I was a patient in my own ICU, being treated for complications from chemotherapy. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I'm terminal. I have weeks left, maybe a month or 2 if I'm lucky." The studio went completely silent, every person frozen in shock. Steve Harvey's face showed immediate devastation, his mouth falling open. Emily's sister Michelle started crying beside her, and the audience made soft sounds of distress. Emily continued, needing to get it all out. "In the bed next to me in the ICU was a woman named Margaret Sullivan. She was 73, dying of heart failure, completely alone, no family. We started talking through the curtain between our beds, and she told me about her regrets, about all the things she'd never done, because she was too scared or too careful or always waiting for someday. And one of her biggest regrets was that she'd always wanted to be on Family Feud, but never applied, always told herself she'd do it later. She died 2 days after I was discharged, alone in that ICU, with her dream unfulfilled. Tears were running down Emily's face now. I went to her funeral, and I made a promise to her memory and to myself. I was going to do the things she never got to do. I was going to apply to Family Feud, and if I got selected, I was going to be here for both of us. So that's why I'm here, Steve. I'm here because a dying woman taught me that someday never comes, that you have to grab joy while you can. I'm here because I have weeks left to live, and I wanted to spend one of those days doing something that brings joy. I'm here because this show represents laughter and family and light, and I need that right now. And I'm here to honor Margaret Sullivan, who never got her chance. The silence in the studio was profound and complete. Steve Harvey stood frozen, tears running down his face, unable to speak. The crew had stopped working, cameras still rolling, but everyone just staring at Emily. Michelle had her arm around her sister, sobbing. The audience was crying, every person understanding they were witnessing something far beyond a game show. Steve Harvey tried to speak several times, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Finally, after what felt like forever, he found his voice, thick and broken. Emily, I don't have words. You have weeks to live, and you chose to spend one of those days here, on this show, keeping a promise to a woman you barely knew. Emily nodded. Margaret and I were only in beds next to each other for 5 days. But in those 5 days, facing death together, we became important to each other. Her regrets became my wake-up call, and I promised myself I wouldn't die with the same regrets. So yes, I'm spending one of my last good days here, because this matters to me, because Margaret's dream matters to me, because joy matters to me even when I'm dying, especially when I'm dying. Steve Harvey put down his cards, walked over to Emily, and pulled her into a hug, both of them crying. When he pulled back, his voice was shaking. Why didn't you tell the producers? Why didn't you let anyone know? Emily's answer was simple. Because I didn't want to be treated like a dying person. I didn't want petty or special treatment or everyone walking on eggshells around me. I wanted to just be a contestant, to play the game, to have fun with my family. I wanted one day where cancer wasn't the most important thing about me. Steve nodded, understanding, then addressed the audience and cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to stop for a minute. We need to just stop and acknowledge what's happening here. Emily Chen is dying. She has weeks left. And she chose to spend one of those weeks coming here, getting on a plane, being on this show, because it mattered to her, and because she made a promise to a woman who died with regrets. That's the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I've ever heard on this stage. He turned back to Emily. What can we do? How can we make this the best day possible for you? Emily smiled through her tears. Let me play. Let me just play Family Feud like a normal contestant. Let me laugh and compete and have fun with my family. That's all I want. That's all Margaret wanted. Just let us play. Steve wiped his eyes, nodded, and picked his cards back up. Then that's what we're going to do. We're going to play Family Feud, and we're going to make sure Emily Chen and Margaret Sullivan both get their moment. The game proceeded, but it was different from any Family Feud game that had ever been played. Everyone in the studio was crying, playing through tears, but also laughing when something funny happened, celebrating when Emily's family got an answer on the board, cheering loudly for every small victory. Emily was radiant, smiling and engaged, answering questions and high-fiving her nephew when he got a good answer, living fully in each moment because she knew how few moments she had left. They played the game with an intensity and joy that transcended competition, everyone understanding that this was about so much more than points. During a commercial break, Steve pulled Emily aside. I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Are you in pain right now? Do you need to stop? Do you need medical attention? Emily shook her head. I'm okay. I'm on enough pain medication to manage. I'm tired, but I'm okay. Please, Steve, let me finish. Let me have this whole day. Steve hugged her again. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Thank you for being here. Thank you for teaching all of us what really matters. When the game resumed, Emily's family won their match. The audience exploded with applause, everyone on their feet, cheering not just because they'd won but because Emily had done it, had kept her promise, had given Margaret Sullivan the Family Feud moment she'd never gotten. Emily was crying and laughing simultaneously, hugging her sister, her niece and nephew, overwhelmed with gratitude that she'd made it, that she'd been strong enough, that she'd honored Margaret and herself. After the taping ended, after the cameras stopped rolling, something extraordinary happened. The other family they'd been competing against approached Emily, and the grandmother of that family, who was probably in her 70s, hugged Emily tightly and said, "I'm Margaret's cousin. Margaret Sullivan was my cousin. When you told that story, when you said her name, I couldn't believe it. I didn't know anyone had been with her when she died. Thank you for being there. Thank you for making her matter." Emily broke down completely, the cosmic impossibility of it overwhelming her. Of all the families to compete against, of all the people who could have been on that stage that day, one of them was Margaret's family. The woman, whose name was Patricia, told Emily that the family had known Margaret died alone in the hospital, had felt terrible about it, had wished someone had been there. "You were there," Patricia said through tears. "You were with her, you heard her dreams, and you made her dream come true even after she was gone. That's a gift I can never repay." She pulled something from her purse, a small pin that had belonged to Margaret, a simple enamel flower. "Margaret wore this every day. I want you to have it, to remember her, to know that you made a difference in her death by giving it meaning." Emily clutched the pin, this tangible connection to Margaret, and she felt like the universe had arranged this moment, had made sure that Emily and Patricia would be here together, that Margaret's story would come full circle. The episode aired 4 weeks later, in August 2024. By then, Emily had entered hospice care at home, her body shutting down, her time measured in days rather than weeks. She was able to watch the episode with her family gathered around her, and she cried watching herself on television, seeing the moment preserved, seeing the promise kept, seeing Margaret honored. Emily Chen died on August 28, 2024, 6 weeks after her Family Feud appearance, surrounded by her family, having lived long enough to see the episode air and to know that her story had touched millions of people. At her funeral, Michelle read a letter Emily had written to be shared after her death. In it, Emily talked about Margaret, about the promise, about how Family Feud had represented something important about grabbing joy even when you're dying, about living fully in whatever time you have. She wrote, "I was diagnosed with terminal cancer at 37 years old. I could have spent my last year angry and bitter and focused only on dying. But Margaret Sullivan taught me something better. She taught me that regrets hurt worse than cancer, that dying with 'I wish I had' is worse than dying with 'I'm glad I did'. I'm glad I went on Family Feud. I'm glad I kept my promise. I'm glad I had that one day of pure joy. That's what I want people to remember, not that I died young, but that I lived fully until the very end." Steve Harvey attended Emily's funeral, having stayed in touch with her family during her final weeks. He gave a eulogy that left everyone crying, talking about how Emily had taught him and everyone who saw that episode what courage really looks like. "Emily knew she was dying," Steve said. "She knew she had limited time, and she chose to spend that precious time keeping a promise to a stranger, honoring a woman she'd barely known, doing something joyful. That's not just brave, that's transcendent. She showed us all how to die well by showing us how to live well, how to grab joy, how to make every day count, how to keep promises even when keeping them costs you strength you don't have. Emily Chen was on my show for one day, but she changed my life and the lives of everyone who met her or heard her story." Patricia, Margaret Sullivan's cousin, spoke too, talking about how Emily had given their family closure about Margaret's death, had let them know Margaret wasn't alone at the end, had honored Margaret in a way the family never could have. "Margaret died with regrets," Patricia said. "But Emily made sure one of those regrets was posthumously fulfilled. My cousin got to be on Family Feud through Emily. That's love. That's grace. That's the kind of thing that makes you believe in human goodness. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that someday never comes and joy should be grabbed whenever possible, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe to our channel because we need more stories like this. Stories that remind us what matters, that show us how to live fully even when dying, that prove promises to the dead matter as much as promises to the living. Emily Chen was a 38-year-old ICU nurse with stage 4 pancreatic cancer who spent one of her last good days on Family Feud, keeping a promise to a dying patient she'd barely known, honoring a woman's unfulfilled dream, teaching everyone watching that living fully means different things when you're facing death, but it always means choosing joy over fear. When she revealed her real reason for playing, when the show froze because nobody knew how to process that level of truth and courage, we all learned something, that the time we have matters less than what we do with it, that keeping promises matters, that joy matters especially at the end, and that some people shine brightest when they know their light is about to go out. That's what Emily Chen taught us, and that's why her story matters.